Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Appreciate you being here on this important topic, transparency at the TSA. Today, the committee will explore the lack of transparency at the Transportation Security Administration. We will hear testimony from the Office of Special Counsel, often known as the OSC, and the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General about problems they're having with the TSA. Congress created the Office of Special Counsel to investigate and prosecute violations of prohibited personnel practices, especially whistleblowing. In order for the OSC to complete its mission, agencies are required to produce complete and unredacted documents to the Office of Special Counsel. Unfortunately, the TSA is not fulfilling their legal obligation to produce documents, frustrating OSC's investigative efforts. And I can tell you with a passion on both sides of this aisle, it is not acceptable to withhold information. It is something we have both committed to on both sides of the aisle to help protect and ensure that whistleblowers are protected. You have a right in this government as a government employee to blow the whistle. But when the TSA withholds documents and does not allow the OSC to do its job, that's wholly unacceptable. Former TSA Administrator Peter Neffinger testified before the committee last May that the TSA would base its response to allegations of whistleblower retaliation on OSC's findings. But now TSA is withholding the documents OSC needs to complete its investigation. So on one hand, you have the TSA Administrator saying, oh, we're going to base our conclusions on the findings of OSC, but the TSA won't give all the information to the OSC. Today, I do not want to hear about how voluminous the documents are. I don't want to hear about how many you've given them. There is but one metric that is important to me, and that is the percentage. If you dare go to the place to tell us about how many documents you've turned over, every time you do so, we will ask you what percentage of the documents did you actually turn over. TSA is one of the agencies in most need of the OSC's work. Since 2012, the OSC received approximately 243 cases from TSA employees alleging retaliation for blowing the whistle. A lot happens, very few blow the whistle, but when they blow the whistle, to have 243 people say that there was retaliation is a number that is a flashing red light and scares us. The committee is constantly hearing how complaints from TSA employees about how the agency is a hostile work environment for whistleblowers. It has been almost a year since our last hearing on the mismanagement at the agency. It's disheartening that we find ourselves here again. It's frustrating and it shouldn't happen. TSA selectively withholds information from OSC by asserting a common law attorney-client privilege that does not apply to interagency disputes. TSA's chief counsel, Francine Kerner, the agency's chief counsel since the agency's inception more than 15 years ago, could not identify the client holding the privilege. When pressed, Kerner informed the staff that, quote, TSA has no legal obligation to turn over documents to the OSC, end quote. Kerner's inability as chief counsel to articulate who she represents and her withholding of information shows a fundamental misunderstanding and antagonism towards the OSC's function. Interestingly, the TSA later sent the committee a letter stating, quote, TSA recognizes its legal obligation to provide documents to the OSC and does so regularly, end quote. In fact, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record. It was sent to us on March 4th without objection, so ordered. It was sent to us March 1st, 2017. It's not about doing it regularly, it's about doing it always. And that is something that drives us here today. The OSC gets to see all of it, 100% of it, not a portion of it, not some of it, not just the parts you want them to see. The OSC gets to see all of it. That means 100%. Furthermore, it should not take a congressional hearing for the TSA to acknowledge an existing legal obligation. Similar to the agency's non-cooperation with the OSC, the committee has long criticized the agency's use of sensitive security information, an SSI designation to withhold information. In 2014, the committee issued a bipartisan report, finding that the agency inconsistently and improperly designated certain information as SSI simply to prevent embarrassing information from being made public. But these problems persist. According to the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General, quote, TSA is abusing its stewardship of the SSI program. None of these redactions will make us safer and simply highlight the inconsistent and arbitrary nature of decisions that TSA cannot be trusted to administer the program in a reasonable manner, end quote. That's about as damning as it gets. That is as direct as it can possibly be. In a recent transcribed interview with the committee, former TSA Deputy Administrator Mark Hatfield told the committee, and I quote, "You could mark a Chinese carryout menu SSI," end quote. Talk about an abuse of the system. A Chinese menu, that was his example. The issue with transparency at TSA tend to have one thing in common, and that's Francine Kerner, the Office of Chief Counsel. She seems to be the conduit and the person that we continually bump into. Kerner has checkered history and has a duty to share information. As a lawyer for the Treasury Department in the early 1990s, she was the subject of an investigation for improperly disclosing confidential information to the White House. Now she's advocating for the TSA to withhold information on alleged whistleblower retaliation from the agency charged to investigate it. There's something fundamentally, totally wrong and backwards about that. Committee will not tolerate these impediments, especially when it comes to protecting whistleblowers and ensuring transparency. The acting administrator is here today. We're requesting today you right this wrong and immediately turn over all information withheld from the OSC and put an end to the practice. We're going to give you a very short timeline to do so, and we will follow up. So I'll recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And last week, our committee conducted an extraordinary interview at my request with Mark Hatfield, who served as the Deputy Administrator of the TSA and worked at the agency for some 13 years. He explained to the committee that TSA employees lack some of the most basic safeguards to protect them against retaliation when they highlight security concerns. The deputy described an agency where, in the absence of normal federal employee safeguards, a culture of retribution and arbitrary personnel actions evolved that made employees reluctant to raise security concerns. I will highlight some of the statements made by the deputy during his interview, and I ask unanimous consent to include longer excerpts in the hearing record. With respect to the subject of today's hearing, the deputy explained, quote, "There was very little transparency. There was a lot of distrust. There was a sense of, in favor and out of favor employees," end of quote. He explained, quote, "So many things were governed by self-direction at TSA, it bred misbehavior," end of quote. He said the lack of protections for employees, quote, "gave people the opportunity to do things that were typically not against the rules because the rules were so flexible, but very questionable when you looked at it from a moral or ethical point of view," end of quote. During the deputy's interview, our staff asked him if the absence of normal federal employee safeguards contributed to an environment in which employees did not want to come forward with information about security. In response, he said, and again I quote, "Oh yeah, I mean, it didn't take long for you to know enough of your compatriots had, taken an arrow in the back and were either wounded or dead, and you had a decision to make depending on how loud you wanted to be or how far you wanted to go," end of quote. The deputy also warned, and I quote, "People learned that if you spoke too loudly, or if you questioned whether the emperor was actually wearing clothes or not, that you could do it at, personal consequence," end of quote. When Congress created the TSA in 2001, it did not provide the agency's employees with all of the due process protections given to other federal employees under Title V. The deputy said that although some flexibility might have been appropriate, that TSA was first created, the agency, and I quote, should have started converting some of these practices to make them more standardized in federal government practices, end of quote. He explained, quote, the structure that gave it the flexibility and the facility and the power to make extraordinary moves it did when it was created should have evolved, and unfortunately, some of them have just led to toxicity rather than a healthy agency, end of quote. One tactic reportedly used against TSA employees was, quote, directed reassignments, end of quote, or forcing employees to move entirely to entirely new locations as punishment for raising concerns. I got to tell you, this is something that really bothered me because, and I'm sure it did the chairman, because we had people who were being divided from their families, one person going maybe to Connecticut and the other one going to Florida. Give me a break. And it was punishment. Punishment. For example, the deputy explained that the former assistant administrator in charge of the agency security operations ran a, quote, very dictatorial department, end of quote. Rather than focusing on improving security, he was, quote, using the directed reassignment process to manipulate positions in the field and to both help people that were in favor and to punish people that were out of favor, end of quote. The deputy confirmed during his interview that one TSA whistleblower, Jay Brainerd, who testified before this committee on April 27, 2016, received a directed reassignment after being, quote, very outspoken, end of quote, about security concerns. According to Deputy Brainerd, quote, would often raise issues, end of quote, about security, including, quote, the extraordinary emphasis on speed over quality of screening, end of quote. The deputy said that this whistleblower highlighted, quote, what many felt was unreasonable reliance on a metric system that was oftentimes beautiful in full-color presentation on slide decks, but was very detached from the reality of the front line where the actions were taking place, end of quote. The deputy also confirmed what we have heard many times before, that TSA has abused the SSI designation to cover up information. He joked that in the early years of the agency, quote, you could mark, and I think the chairman referred to this, you could mark a Chinese carry-out menu SSI, end of quote. He added, quote, a brochure or something that was clearly public, consumable material or information you could get on the internet or in the library, and they would, stamp it SSI, end of quote. Now, from everything we have seen, TSA operations have improved over the last 2 years under most recent administrator, Vice Admiral Peter Neffinger. But the deputy's interview last week makes crystal clear that TSA employees need the same protections as other federal employees so they can speak up about the security of the American people without being retaliated against. And Congress can consider these reforms. And let me say to the chairman, I thank you again, and I thank all of our members for standing up for whistleblowers. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't stand up for whistleblowers, we don't need to be here. We need to go and get another job, because as far as I'm concerned, it would be legislative and congressional malpractice not to do so. Some of the best information that we have gotten from whistleblowers, and we must do everything in our power at all times to protect them. And on the other hand, for anyone who thinks Congress should receive Title V protection for employees at other federal agencies, TSA is a case study demonstrating why this would be a terrible idea. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I also noticed that Congressman Sarbanes just came in, and he's one of our newest members. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Glad you're here. Members are advised that we do anticipate votes on the floor. We're going to hopefully get through all of the opening statements, but at the appropriate time we will break. The intention is to allow the votes on the floor and then we'll come back and finish up the hearing. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement, but let's now recognize our panel. We're pleased to welcome Ms. Gawadia. She's the Acting Administrator for the Transportation Security Administration. The Honorable John Roth, Inspector General for the United States Department of Homeland Security, and the Honorable Carolyn Lerner, a Special Counsel for the Office of Special Counsel, Special Counsel for the United States Office of Special Counsel. We welcome you all. Pursuant to committee rules, you are to be sworn before you testify. So if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated and let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. We would appreciate it if you would limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. We'll give you a little bit of latitude, but of course your entire written statement will be made part of the record. We'll now recognize the Acting Administrator for 5 minutes. And but by the way, you have to straighten it up and get that microphone right up in there. It's a little uncomfortable, but bring it up close. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for affording me the opportunity and privilege to speak to you today about information transparency at the Transportation Security Administration. I am indeed fortunate to represent a tremendous workforce that is responsible for executing a critical security mission to protect the nation's transportation systems. Vital to that mission's success is how we share information with our many transportation security partners. The dynamic and increasingly complex threat environment in which we operate demands that TSA and our partners share information in a timely and secure manner. To that end, we work closely across the spectrum of transportation modes to exchange information, solicit feedback, and develop policy and guidelines. Indeed, our recent cooperative initiatives with industry stakeholders have yielded significant improvements to our security operations. For instance, we collaborated with airports and air carriers to address the surge in passenger volumes last spring and summer. And in the process, we established our Airport Operations Center as a permanent and direct communication channel. Leveraging the center, TSA continues to hold daily calls with airlines and airports to track screening operations. We also communicate regularly with the traveling public through a variety of outreach efforts, press releases, and social media. TSA Cares and at Ask TSA are 2 of our most popular and successful models of passenger engagement. But the transportation security system does not stop at our borders. It is undeniably global in nature. That is why TSA works alongside partners and plays a leading role in a number of regional and international organizations with a common vision for transportation security. Across all our interactions, TSA strives to be transparent and forthright. In point of fact, doing so serves our interest, as the free and frequent exchange of information to and from partners helps us make better informed decisions and build lasting trust. However, we also must remain absolutely vigilant in safeguarding against the release of sensitive information, which could cause harm if disclosed to our adversaries. We must balance the transparent flow of information with our serious responsibility to prevent that information from falling into the wrong hands. For that reason, we ensure that information requiring protection is properly marked, handled, and distributed. Sensitive Security Information, or SSI, is one category of protected information that is defined by statute. Governing departmental and TSA management directives mandate that such information be released to the maximum extent possible without compromising transportation security. And because we count on our greatest resource, our people, to enforce these protections, we have updated SSI training and made it an annual requirement for all TSA employees and contractors. In addition, we have developed a comprehensive SSI policies and procedures handbook, as well as improved reference guides. Keeping with the spirit of transparency and preserving the public's access to appropriate information, TSA also follows established procedures for adjudicating challenges to SSI designations. Taken together, these measures enhance the SSI program and contribute to TSA's overall growth as a true learning organization. We must also continue to learn from each other. I encourage my TSA colleagues to feel empowered in voicing their thoughts, suggestions, and concerns that can lead to improvements in our workplace environment and how we do business. That means creating and sustaining an organizational culture which values responsible challenges to conventional thinking and invites opportunities to get better. And those opportunities can come from a number of sources, be it an audit conducted by the Inspector General or an employee calling attention to an agency impropriety. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Roth and Ms. Lerner for the efforts of their offices. With their help, I do believe we will continue to improve. Let me stress that no matter where the challenge comes from, TSA has zero tolerance for prohibited personnel practices, such as retaliation against whistleblowers. TSA is fortunate to have employees and stakeholders with a shared passion for mission success and integrity. We will continue to work hard to exceed their expectations. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that each side of the coin, sharing information transparently and protecting information when it is required, is indispensable to our national security mission. I have every confidence that the proud men and women of TSA today are more than up to both tasks. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Before we recognize the Inspector General, members are advised we have a vote on the floor. So I'm going to put us into recess, and we will reconvene no sooner than 11 a.m. So you're free to go to the cafeteria, do whatever you want to do. We'll be no sooner than 11, but if you'd please be back here just before 11. And as soon as the votes are done on the floor, we'll reconvene. Committee stands in recess.